Record.
Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. My name's Radha, and I'm here with our family of seekers, and we're reading through the Bhagavad Gita. We are currently in chapter six, text six, and we are talking about the mind. We're learning a lot about the mind, and we're going to kind of continue that strain of thought today. So, with that, let's just get right into it. Stella, do you want to read text six for us?
Sure. For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy.
Thank you. So, yeah, when the mind is controlled, the mind becomes our friend. When it's uncontrolled, it becomes our enemy. And like we talked about the last time, living in the material world, we need the mind and the senses to function. It's kind of the bridge between the soul and the physical world. So we need this to interact and to navigate daily life. And we can't just simply reject it or shut them down, the mind and the senses. But we do need to regulate them, right? We do need to control them one way or the other so that they serve us rather than sabotage us. So before today, we're going to talk about a lot of ways that the mind can sabotage us. And not to, speak badly of the mind, but to understand its vulnerabilities so that when it's happening to us, when it's working on us in that way, we can control it. We can start to identify it, which is number one, and then we can start to kind of refine it. So we're going to talk a lot today about kind of pitfalls to look out for. And the other thing is that helps us with this is this understanding that we are not the mind. Right? We're not the body, we are not the mind, we are souls. And the mind is just a part of our hardware, of our computer. It's just a part of it. And in that way, we have to kind of train it to work in our favor. And so that it elevates our consciousness. So we see the mind more just like an instrument for us that needs to be kind of tamed and controlled. And the Gita offers us insights into how to do that. So the Gita, tells us, gives us kind of the roadmap, like the owner's manual. Like this is how this particular this particular instrument is going to function, and this is what you need to do to make it work for you. Remembering that it's not you, and that makes all the difference as well, because when we overly identify with the mind, we become the mind, right? We think that we're the mind, and therefore everything that the mind tells us to do, we're like overly emotionally attached to. And that creates a whole other host of problems. And we'll talk about that today as well. Okay, so just to kind of zoom way out before we start really getting into the mind, to put the mind in context of this system, right? That the Gita presents a three-level model of the self, okay? The soul, the mind, and the body. And to understand this, we've used a computer metaphor in the past. Like the body is like the hardware. Okay, the mind is the software, and the soul is the user. Okay, the body's the hardware, the mind's the software, the soul is the user. So just as the software is essential for the user to operate the hardware, the mind is that vital link that allows the soul to interact with the body and the world. So if we think of them all in a row, you have the soul, the mind, and the body. Okay, the soul is the root of consciousness. So that consciousness flows through the mind, which acts as that channel that connects the soul to the body and the external world. Right? So in that way, the body then becomes the vehicle through which we perceive and act. And therefore, only when we learn to manage and regulate the mind, which is, again, this link between the soul and the body, can our energy be directed in ways that are productive and purposeful, and ultimately aligned with our higher selves. So we need to kind of learn to see it like that, that it's not us. We can see it in kind of an objective way. It's an instrument that needs to be calibrated. And the Bhagavad Gita teaches us how to calibrate it. Is that clear? The kind of context of the mind and the body and the soul and what the mind's role in our everyday lives? Okay, so we'll move on and we'll talk a little bit about how we can start calibrating the mind, right? What we can do and how to identify when the mind is kind of out of order. Okay. And ways that it can operate when it's out of order, right? Ways that it can start to degrade our consciousness when it's not working properly. So the first thing when we talk about keeping the mind, keeping us directing our energy in a productive and purposeful way, this leads to a practical question of how do we keep the mind constructively engaged, right? Because if we honestly reflect on moments that we later regretted, right, we often will find that there's some inner voice inside of us that was prompting us in those moments. And according to the Gita, this voice is the voice of the mind. Maybe you said something out of turn or just in a moment of heated um, emotions, or whatever it be. We've all done those things where we think back and we're like, I shouldn't have acted like that, or I shouldn't have said that, or and this voice that prompts us to do that, the Gita identifies it as the mind. So Krishna explains that when it's uncontrolled, the mind becomes our greatest enemy, right? Urging us towards destructive choices. But when it's properly guided and engaged, it becomes our best friend. So we can kind of think, the mind would be like the child. If you give your child like a computer, like a YouTube site, a computer with YouTube up, and you say, okay, find a video, and the child, just whatever they see that is attractive, they're just going to click on. Where the parent, and this would be like the intelligence, the parent would, go and filter those videos that aren't good for the child to watch. Right? So the mind is like impulsive. The mind just acts based off of emotion, whatever it's feeling in that moment. And what we need to do is understand that that's the function of the mind. That's that's the engine that we're working with. That's how it's going to run. But we also have this intelligence faculty that we can calibrate to control the mind. And that's again what we're going to learn here is that the mind's going to act like that, but we can tame it with this intelligence faculty. Okay? Because left untamed, the mind is going to naturally drift towards lower desires, right? Or emotions such as worry or envy or resentment. So, the first step in mastering the mind is to keep it constructively engaged. Keep the mind constructively engaged. And this doesn't mean rushing around frantically or like filling every moment with activity. Oftentimes that can have the opposite effect. It can just be distracting for us and more stressful for us, right? But this constructive engagement means meaningfully occupying the mind with awareness, right? Doing something valuable while knowing what and why we are doing it. And so staying alert, right? Allowing our intelligence and our conscience to gently guide the mind back whenever it starts to wander. And many of us practice this every day, right? When we are practicing meditation, that is the practice, is noticing when the mind starts to wander and bringing it back. Noticing when the mind starts to wander and bringing it back. And what do we always say in meditation? Like don't judge the mind. Don't start going into, just notice it like an observer. Right? Because the Gita teaches us that's what we are. The mind is not us. It's an instrument that we have to learn to tune. And so that's even the practice in our everyday lives. Right? Is what mindfully engage the mind in something constructive, understanding why and what you're doing and bring it back to that. So you can do this, like I said, just like in meditation, your sincere reflection, prayer, study, this all counts as constructive engagement. And through this purposeful involvement, this restless enemy of the mind can gradually transform into a steady friend. So that's kind of big picture of the mind and how we can start to tame the mind. But let's talk about some pitfalls of the mind, right? Because the more that we're aware of kind of the mind's games, the easier it will be to identify them when they're happening and to bring it back, to bring the mind back. Right? So we're going to go into, I think for the rest of the class, really, we're going to kind of talk about some of the mind tricks. Right? It's like who are we dealing with here? Right? Okay, so the first thing that we can do in dealing with the mind is learn to take the mind's promises with a grain of salt. Right? Most of us have, we live in a world where we've learned to be skeptical of advertisements, right? Everything's flashing around us, promising happiness or success or beauty. I mean, all you have to do is like open your phone and it's just like there right in front of you, right? Promising all of these things. And it's all just crafted to take our money, so that and on the promise that it will genuinely improve our lives, right? So we know that this is the way that the world works around us. Our phones, billboards, magazines, everywhere you look, it's just cramming this in your face, promising happiness, success. But what we rarely question is when the mind does this to us, right? Because the mind does this exact same thing. And it constantly pitches these ideas, this will make you happy. You need to achieve this. If you don't get this, you'll be miserable. And without much reflection, we often even buy into these mental ads completely, right? We'll get attached to certain outcomes, even when we think that we're not, we still are, right? We'll obsess over them. We'll push ourselves to make them happy, or sorry, to make them happen, without even pausing to ask, why does this even matter so much to me? And one of the reasons that it's so easy for us to fall into this trap, to fall for these messages, is that we make this mistake of too closely identifying with the mind. Right? That's why this philosophy of understanding and really realizing that we're not the mind, right? And that's just an instrument in this vehicle is so powerful. Because what happens when we over-identify with the mind, we think that this idea is my idea, right? And once the ego gets involved and we start to take ownership of a thought or an impulse, we become emotionally invested in carrying it out. Right? Even if it's unwise or destructive, because it's mine, because we've decided this is mine, I've taken ownership, I'm emotionally invested. I've made it mean something about me one way or the other. And then it's like tunnel vision. It's like that's all that we see. Even if there's like flashing red lights along the way, like stop, stop, we don't see them. We just keep driving because we're so emotionally vested. And we'll remain in denial. Even if it's a bad decision, we'll remain in denial about it, or we'll rationalize it, or we'll blame others, or we'll play the victim. Just whatever we can do to justify what we're doing because we've made it about us. And that is such a sticky trap. That is such a sticky trap for those of us that are trying to move towards this, self-improvement, connection with source. It's like our feet are in molasses when we're doing that, and we get kind of stuck. So we have to be really careful of this trap. When we start overly identifying with our ideas or our desires, and we make them mean something about ourselves. We have to learn to see the mind just like we see all those advertisements around us, when we're skeptical of them. Or is it, you get somebody calls you, a telemarketer calls you and is like, let me tell you about the latest new product. And right away, okay, this person's just calling me because they want my money. I don't really feel like talking to them. Bam, hang up the phone. Right? We have to learn to do that with our mind too. When an idea comes that we know isn't even great for us, or maybe we don't know one way or the other, but still be cautious. Be cautious. Is that a word? Cautious. Be cautious enough. Be cautious enough to not just put the full pedal to the metal and just drive it out no matter what. Right? Allow that space. Allow that space for God. Right? So we have to learn to see the mind like that. And the first step in breaking free from this is learning to be skeptical of its promises. Right? And what happens when we consistently meet the mind's fantasies with grounded skepticism, over time, it stops pushing them so aggressively. The mind begins to settle. It's like after enough time, when we stop just believing everything the mind tells us, it stops being so forceful in its convictions. It will relax a little bit. And even better than that, when we give the mind repeated experiences of this deeper joys of connection in devotional service, hearing, chanting, praying, serving, the mind starts to develop a taste for those more refined pleasures. So we're starting to kind of train the mind, right? And slowly but surely, it starts to become our ally rather than our manipulator. So this is, again, how we start training the mind to be our friend and recognizing when it's starting to act like that restless child just on the ground throwing a tantrum, right? And how we can recognize when it's starting to do that, and we can start to kind of create that space so that we don't get pulled in to every tantrum. So the other thing here is not letting the mind control the practices that are meant to control the mind. Okay, so even when we turn towards spiritual practices, we have to be alert, right? Because spiritual practices are meant to help purify and steady the mind. But if we're not careful, this is another trick of the mind. The mind can hijack those very practices and use them to serve the ego instead of the soul. And we've all seen that, in spiritual life, or really in material life, in anything. It's like where the intention gets twisted because greed or lust or anger is at the forefront. And when it's really supposed to be about, connecting with God and accepting people, it becomes kind of like the opposite. Right? Like fasting, for example, it's meant to help us reduce the mind's attachment to food and to deepen our connection, our spiritual focus, right? But the mind has a tendency to twist it into something else, right? Like an opportunity to feel superior or to show off our self-control, right? Or to create some space between us and others that aren't as austere, right? This is a trick of the mind. The mind will do this to us if we're not careful, because these anarthas just creep in and invade our consciousness. This greed, envy, anger, lust, they just invade our consciousness and they hijack the mind. So, while we're in the process of this recalibrating, this plugging the mind into this higher frequency, we have to be weary of these vulnerabilities, that can happen to us as the mind comes in and gets hijacked. Just like in a war, when an army captures the enemy's weapons and turns them back against them, right? The mind can do the same thing. And it doesn't mean anything about you. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you're a hypocrite. It just means that your mind has become hijacked. And we have to identify that and bring it back under control. And we have to stay introspective. We need to regularly examine our inner motives and study sacred texts to understand these subtleties, the subtleties of the mind. These sacred texts tell us this, look out for this. The mind will turn against you. Spend time with saintly, sincere people who help keep us grounded and honest. So with humility and guidance, we can ensure that our practices remain tools for transformation, not weapons misused by the ego. But if we let our guard up for even a second, this can happen to us. The ego will creep in and it will turn these things into weapons for itself. So be alert and careful as to that vulnerability as well. Does anybody want to share anything before I move on? Okay, we'll go to the next one. So the other thing, another trick of the mind, and this is one that I find super relatable here. The mind makes us fight unwinnable wars. Right? Okay, so in life, it's inevitable that we're going to face challenges, right? Adversities, conflicts, and then these things are going to require our strength and our discernment, right? But the mind, when it's uncontrolled, it can become our worst enemy by dragging us into wars that are unwinnable or just unwise, right? Like fighting battles that we can't win. So it's like when the mind gets in this loop of just resentment, right? And this is why resentment can be so toxic to a spiritual path. It could just bring us down, and we can't even do anything about it. It's like these events, they're in the past. They can't be changed. Or these are people that can't be changed. But we're just sitting and just kind of marinating in this endless loop of resentment. And the mind just keeps replaying it over and over, right? Urging us to stay stuck in bitterness and blame. Okay, this can be toxic. This can be toxic for the consciousness. This is a trick of the mind that brings the consciousness down. And we have to be aware when it's getting there. We don't really need to use the mind's faculty for that. And we can work to understand things that have bothered us, and to have to invoke whatever change is possible in our sphere of influence. But we also have to learn to let go of things that we just can't, right? Or they're going to pull us down. And the other thing that the mind will do is it'll fight battles without a clear victory, right? Like lashing out at loved ones when they disappoint us. And not just anybody ever done this, like not just even addressing the current issue, but all of a sudden it's like years of like bottled up frustration that you're just unleashing. And there's really no real reason for it. It's like you're just kind of, it's just kind of, you're just feeling really emotional and frustrated in the moment, and it just comes out. Right. And you think it'll bring relief, but oftentimes it just makes you feel worse, or it makes the tension in the relationship greater. Right. It just deepens the pain and the damage. Right. And this doesn't mean that we should avoid addressing real concerns, because we absolutely should. But we also need to reflect on what we're trying to change and how we're going about it. Because we need to recognize, excuse me, we need to recognize that the mind is programmed to act on impulse. That's how the mind's going to act, not insight, right? So we have to use that intelligence faculty to guide the mind. And if we're feeling really fired up about something and and we haven't really processed it emotionally yet, maybe it's not the time to have that conversation, right? Because we're more susceptible for the mind to just take over and sabotage ourselves or our relationships. So we have to be mindful that, again, when we're operating like that, it's the mind is in control. Right? When we're operating on that frequency, the mind is in control. And again, it doesn't make us bad. It doesn't make us mean. It just means that we need to kind of recalibrate our vehicle here. And in that way, we can make the mind work for us and not against us. Does anybody want to share anything about that? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I that is like that was my week in a nutshell. I totally I totally let my mind be impulsive. I really recognize that. It's like, whoa. So that resonated for me. Thank you.
Oh, good. Yeah. I think we all do, and it's like something we have to kind of work at and get better at, just like if you're starting to play a sport and you're not going to be, the perfect right away. It like takes some time. But the more that we can be aware of the mind and how it can sabotage us, the more that we can start to kind of turn it around. But it's just so normal for these things to happen to us, or like, and I've always found that if you're feeling emotionally charged, or you feel any like inner conflict and you don't feel harmonious about something, better just to not say anything at all. Like you never regret not saying anything, you know? And then,
It's
and
so
yeah,
true. Yes.
yeah, right?
Your
It's like,
mouth is shut.
yeah, because you can feel that. And sometimes we feel pressure to say something right away, or, maybe that person wants an answer, and it's like, it's so just don't. If you know that it's not going to be in line with your higher values, just don't sabotage yourself. Just give yourself some time for you to emotionally settle and for the intelligence to come in and kind of clean up a little bit and then address whatever needs to be addressed. But it's funny how we do that. We just rush in
And
and
it's
and
part
we end
of
up
the animal propensity to defend, you
yeah,
know, and that's like an instinctual, just like eating, sleeping, mating, defending is pretty strong. And I find that sometimes, if it's emotionally charged, it's not that I even like disagree, or I'm just defending myself. Like, even though there's nothing really to defend.
sure. Yeah, totally. And the more that we connect with Krishna and open ourselves up to his guidance and become grounded in that relationship, we'll feel less need to even defend because
Yeah.
we'll know more securely who we are. And we won't need to, convince the rest of the world of it because we'll have that connection that such that we'll know it, you know.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Anybody else before we move on to the next trick of the mind? Okay, the next trick of the mind. The mind has this strange and frustrating habit. So tell me if this has ever happened to any of you guys also. It seduces us into doing the wrong thing, and then it scolds us for having done it. Right? It's like, oh, that thing of ice cream in the fridge, that's going to be delicious right now. That would just make your day great. You should do this. And then you do it, and it's like, oh, why did you do that? You don't feel good. You know it's not good for you. Yeah, it's just like this flip switch. It's like if we had this relationship with any person, it would be so toxic, right? It's like we would avoid this relationship. If like you have a terrible boss, someone who tells you to do something that makes no sense and then gets angry at you for acting senselessly, right? And then when you try to explain, like, I was just following what you told me to do, they berate you for being stupid. This is just, it's such a toxic dynamic, but we have this relationship with our minds. That's again, it's a trick of the mind. It'll tempt us with these vivid, seductive images of pleasure. Just indulge this once, it'll tell us. You'll feel so much better. You deserve it. Right? But then after we give in and face the consequences, guilt, discomfort, disappointment, the mind will turn around and say, "What's wrong with you? Why are you so weak?" And this is so normal, but we have to be attuned to when the mind is up to this trick. We oftentimes know. We oftentimes know, but we'll override the intelligence. The mind will just override the intelligence, right? And then the mind will blame us for it afterwards. So again, just being attuned to these tricks, knowing how this is going to play out. When your mind's talking you into staying up all night watching Netflix, know enough that, fast forward that moment, a few hours or a day in your mind and know, okay, this isn't going to end up well for me. I'm going to wake up tired. I have too much to do tomorrow. I want to be able to wake up early and engage in my spiritual practices. This is, we have to override the mind with the intelligence because it's going to be relentless. And this is just the nature of the mind. It's just like a child, it's going to get stuck. It's going to want what it wants when it wants it. It's going to lay on the floor and throw a temper tantrum. And we have to know when we have to override it with the intelligence. What I saw on Instagram the other day? Just, I keep thinking of this every time I talk about this temper tantrum. I saw like a video of like a grown person at an airport doing that thing where kids lay on the ground and kick their feet and but that's what our mind is doing. Your mind's grown. It's pretty evolved, but at the same time, it's throwing these temper tantrums over things that we know are not in our higher nature, right? So recognize when your adult mind is laying on that airport floor kicking its legs and have the intelligence to override. Right? Learn to stop listening to the mind so submissively. We do that too. We just let the mind just drive us around. And instead, we need to tune into this higher voice, the voice of divinity, right? Who speaks to us through guru, sastra, sadhu, spiritual teachers, sacred texts, saintly souls. Those are the voices that we need to be listening to. This is how we need to calibrate this vehicle, right? To that frequency. This will help us sharpen our inner clarity, right? We'll become better equipped to even see these mind's tricks. Right? And we'll be able to respond with wisdom instead of impulse. So that's how we even protect ourselves. That's even how what we're doing here. We're calibrating the intelligence. We're arming the intelligence, really. We're telling the intelligence, right, this is where the mind's going to try to hide. These are the weapons that the mind has. Get ready. And then this is how we do it. This is how we gradually transform the mind from an inner saboteur into a sincere servant. And that's what we have to do, because it's not just going to happen for us. And we can't just expect it to, because this is just the functioning of the mind. Does anybody want to share about that before we move on to the next one? Okay.
Talking about the mind, so many things we resonate. And one thing that you just said, the mind is sabotaging, telling us to do something, and then we regret it later. Like I start talking, this new neighbor came, and then I start talking to them, and then 20-30 minutes got wasted. And then I'm like, oh my God, why did I do that? And then I invited them into my home and I showed them my house. I usually show because I have so beautiful my temples. So, but then why do I do that? Then I feel stupid, like you said. That happens so many times. We just get carried away with our habits or what the mind says, and we shouldn't be doing. Like you said about Netflix, this is what I get into all the time. That was what I wanted to share.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and it's so different for all of us too, these things that the mind pulls us in, but the principle is the same, is that we all kind of feel when it's happening and
Yes.
and we know and we do it
And still,
anyway, and then we blame the mind.
yeah, just like you said, first we do it, and then the mind itself is telling me, why did you do that? Why are you wasting your time? You should be reading your books, you should be meditating, what is your Guru Shastra telling you to? Always keep your mind occupied in Krishna. And then, so this is what happens. That mind tells us to talk, and then that mind also scolds us later.
Yes. Yes. That's great. So just so know this pattern and just create this space in your day to even kind of pause and reflect and journal. Journaling is so great and so powerful so that the next time we can identify it earlier, we can play this out and we can make that choice ahead of time. We can override the mind before it overrides us.
Our mind is always
Yeah,
overriding, yes.
it's always overriding. Yes. But coming here together, talking about it, learning about how it functions, we can all grow together in this.
Yes, coming here and learning more and more about the mind is it's a blessing, it's a gift.
Mm, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Thank you guys for sharing. So this next one here is pretty big too. we have to be careful to let the mind not let the mind take us to a hell that we can't come back from. Right? Like if when we think of the worst, like the one side of the spectrum of this, we think of like addiction. That's such a striking example of how the mind's becoming our worst enemy. Addicts live in this mental hell. They're tormented by these unbearable cravings, the suffocating shame. It's relentless self-loathing and a crushing sense of hopelessness. This is addiction, and no one's born an addict. It's not like somebody's a little child and aspires to be an addict. It's like it just begins with small indulgences, giving into desires here and there until those indulgences snowball into uncontrollable urges. The mind becomes a tyrant. And then what once seemed just like a harmless pleasure becomes a prison. So this is where Krishna's warning us, that the uncontrolled mind can degrade us. It can drag us into darkness and shut the door to peace and clarity. But so even if we aren't addicts, our mind can still lead us to these temporary versions of hell, these states of suffering that feel inescapable. And in the Gita later, we're going to learn in the 16th chapter, Krishna explains that this lust, anger, greed are 3 gates to hell. Each of these poison the mind and the heart in different ways. So because of these three anartas, lust, anger, greed, they create these fantasies in our mind that our mind just starts playing out. Lust it deceives us with fantasies of satisfaction. This is going to feel good. This is gonna, you get so lusty over something, and it oftentimes only leaves you feeling more empty and obsessed. Anger hijacks our intelligence, and it makes us say and do things we regret. It destroys relationships, peace, even our health. Greed fuels this dissatisfaction and selfishness. It makes us constantly feel like we don't have enough. We're always fantasizing about the next thing that we can acquire. So that's what happens when these three culprits, these 3 like friends come in, not friends, but they think that they're our friends. They come in and they poison the mind and they spin stories in our minds, fantasies and justifications, and they seem so convincing in the moment. And if we entertain these fantasies long enough, they can dominate us. And life and when that happens, life will just offer a chance to act on them, and then we fall, and then we find ourselves in hell. So if these 3 things, when we start to see these things pop up in our life, this lust, anger, greed, be mindful. It may be easy to see that if I drink a lot of alcohol, I'll turn into an alcoholic. But if you fill your life, if these things can come and invade your consciousness and just take over, just like spread like a fungus, right? This anger, greed, lust. And that's what and then we become just living in that place. Right? And it becomes this temporary hell. So the Gita warns us of these things, warns us of these things that can come and invade our mind. And the Gita tells us that the mind can also be our friend. It can be our enemy if we let these things take over, but it can also be our friend. And the key to this is to not blindly believe its suggestions. And so we have to recognize that just because a thought arises doesn't mean it's true or worth following. And in this way, we avoid being dragged into hell, right? Now, and not just through force alone, but through redirection. Instead of fixating on the mind's cravings, we can turn our attention towards something higher. So you may have a craving, you may have a lustful thought, you may have a greedy desire, but just be careful, be mindful of how much you're feeding that, right? Because the more that you're feeding that, the more it's like wildfire taking over your consciousness. Where if we turn to divinity and we connect our consciousness with something higher, something the all pure supreme, this redirection purifies the mind. And this is how it gradually is transformed from a saboteur into an ally. So that's what we again need to use the intelligence to recognize when this is happening to us, when we're feeding these things, and to redirect. Right? So resisting the mind is tough, but redirecting makes it easier. And every time that we choose to hear, to chant, to serve, to remember God, right, we're reinforcing this voice of truth, and we're loosening the grip of illusion. Every time that we make that decision to do those things instead of something that feeds our lust, our anger, our greed, right? We're pushing over that side of our consciousness that's reaching for those things, and we're filling it up more with this God consciousness that's going to purify our mind. Right? But we have to stay vigilant. This happens like one decision at a time, what we're going to choose. And we may not win all of the wars right away. Right? It takes a little bit of time to clear out that consciousness. But if we just do it one decision at a time. Right? We always, remember that we always have that choice. A single moment of clarity, humility, spiritual connection. This can change the trajectory of our entire inner world if we just stay vigilant. Vigilant. That's not a word. I think I just combined vigilant and diligent. Anyway, you get the point. It left to its own devices, that is what will invade the mind. Those weeds of lust, anger, greed, that they'll grow in the mind untamed unless we're consistently working at what do you use? That Roundup? Does anybody use Roundup? So spraying the weeds. I know it's not a very good pesticide. I don't know what's a better way to get the weeds out, pulling them. Anyway, okay, let's go to the next one. Does anybody want to share anything? Okay, so this last point here is that oftentimes, people will think that restraining our impulses, whether for the sake of like social etiquette or spiritual growth, means that we're being fake, right? And we should understand that that's not necessarily true. It's because just like we talked about earlier, in most areas of our life, we understand that the first time we do something, it's rarely our best, right? Like if we're learning to play an instrument, the first time you try to play a song, it's probably going to be clumsy and off key, right? But over time, as you practice and you refine it, the same person can eventually express deep emotion and beauty through their playing, right? And it's not that the initial attempt was fake, it just wasn't fully developed. So the same thing is true in our life, in our spiritual practice. The Gita tells us that our true self is the soul, a pure part of the all pure supreme, right? And that's the self that we're meant to express. And we learn this and we know this, right? But we're gonna fumble around a little bit as we're learning to act from that place, right? As we're connected enough to act from that place. Because in the meantime, our ability to express this deeper self is sabotaged by the mind, right? And this is when the mind acts like an inner enemy. It sabotages our ability to express our pure self. It pushes us to act impulsively, right? Or reactively. And this leads us to misrepresent ourselves or fall short of our values. So to change this, we need self-restraint, right? And in spiritual life, restraint becomes hypocrisy only when we have no intention of transforming our inner life to match our outer behavior. Okay, but if you have, if you're thinking bad things about somebody, but you choose not to say that, if you choose not to share it with others, because that doesn't really align with your deeper values, that's an example of you like working to get there. You may not be there yet, but you're working to get there. And we all have to kind of start somewhere. So in that way, we shouldn't feel like a hypocrite if we, have these desires and we don't act on them. No, that's progress. As long as we have that intention of harmonizing our inner life with our outer life. If we don't have that intention and it's all about the outer life and we just want to set up this facade, then yeah, that's where we become hypocritical. But if we have this sincere intention and we're working towards it, then that's just what it is. Right? So sometimes we just get discouraged, or we may feel like we're pulled in different directions, and you probably are. But just keep at it. Keep that sincere intention and keep just making one decision at a time to elevate your consciousness in that way, right? And not let your mind degrade you, because this is what's going to happen in this conditioned state, right? But if we practice sincerely, this discipline, it becomes a tool for purification. It connects us with this all pure divinity, right? And then it gradually brings our thoughts, our feelings, our actions into alignment. But spiritual life, it's a practice just like anything else. And it's going to take time to get there so that those things are all in alignment. But know that it can happen, and that's what we're working towards. Right? Every time that you restrain your impulses and you redirect your heart towards God, we begin an inner refinement process that brings out the best in us. Right? And in that best version, it isn't fake. It's actually who we really are. Right? Because the Gita tells us that we're souls, right? And we've talked about the qualities of the soul quite a bit in chapter 2. And that's who we are. These other things cover us up. This greed, envy, false ego, illusion, these things cover us up, but that's not who we are. And we're working through that. We're working through kind of clearing those weeds so that our souls can shine. Yeah, Stella says, sincere intent helps the mind become a sincere servant. Yeah, intention is really everything. And that's the difference as to whether or not you're a hypocrite, right? And only you know that, right? Only you know that, how much your intention is aligned. And sometimes we see somebody and we judge them and say that they're a hypocrite, but maybe they're just trying. Maybe they really are trying. Maybe their pure intention is there and they've come a long ways. And we don't necessarily see that. So that's another kind of, we should be mindful and maybe a little more compassionate of ourselves and others in that way. Does anybody want to share anything else? Okay, so the last point here before we end for the day. Intention is everything, Kay says. Yeah, intention is everything. That's a beautiful thing about spiritual life. Material life, it's like how good you are, how successful you are, how much money you make. You have all these external metrics. But in spiritual life, it's like your success is your, not even success, but your growth is so largely determined by your intention, and your sincere intention. And that's the difference between somebody that's going to stick around and gradually grow, or somebody that's going to burn out. Because that we know that external reward is just not enough. It's just not enough for spiritual life. We need that internal satisfaction, that internal connection. And when we have that, the more you have that, the more it even purifies your intention. And that's the way spiritual life works. Like your intention becomes pure and pure and pure. And that's what carries you through. Yeah, so nice. Thank you. So in the purport to this verse, Prabhupada emphasizes a deep spiritual truth. He says that we're always serving someone or something. We're always serving someone or something, right? The soul by nature is a servant. So either we're serving God or we're serving illusion, right? That material energy that distracts us from our true self. There is no third option. Right? Let that sink in for a moment. Right? There's no third option. You're either serving God or you're serving this material energy. Just like you can think of it like being in a river with the current, and you can't just float in place. Right? If you're not actively swimming towards the shore, that'd be like swimming towards God, you're automatically going to be carried downstream. And that would be like to illusion. So in the same way, consciousness has gravity. It's not just going to stay still. By nature, it doesn't work like this. If you're not actively directing it towards something higher, it's going to fall. Right? If we're not intentionally connecting it, it's going to sink. This is the nature of consciousness. It's also the nature of material reality. Right? So we can't just reject illusion. That's not enough. We also have to reach for divinity. So that's why Krishna says that the mind can either be our friend or our enemy. Most of the time we let it lead. We act as its obedient servant. And sometimes we're even so convinced that we're not, but we really still are. And anytime we feel that attachment, that pull, that over emotional reaction, that's the mind. And we don't even know it because we're so deeply identified with it. But when we start to create that space and we understand how the mind functions and it's like default mode, we start to see this. The mind will tell us, do this, and we'll surrender, even if it's harmful in the long run, even when we know better, right, Kay? Even when we know better. And we'll give up these peaceful and purposeful actions for just fleeting distractions and often regret it later. And this is the trap. This is the trap of the mind, and we fall into it. We trust it too much. But what we're learning here and what Krishna is telling us is that we need to trust Krishna. Right? He's our well-wisher. What he guides us to do through scripture, spiritual teachers, the voice in our heart, that's for our ultimate good. Also be careful with that voice in your heart because the mind overrides that too. So when we're in our conditioned state, we have to be very careful about that too. As we get pure and more, we can trust that voice in the heart. But that mind, that's also a place that the mind likes to sabotage. Right? And this is just the nature of it. Right? But so to follow God, we have to disobey the mind. And not harshly, but wisely. Because if we don't steer it, the current will. It will fall down. Okay, so in the next verse, Krishna is going to describe the qualities of someone who's conquered the mind. And that's what we'll get into next. But just to wrap this up, the mind is a powerful force. Right? It can either be our closest friend or our toughest enemy. And the difference lies in how we relate to it. So when it's uncontrolled, the mind leads us into confusion, to suffering, to unwise actions, right? But when we learn to regulate and engage it mindfully, anchored in this higher consciousness and Krishna's guidance, it can transform into a steady ally that helps live purposefully and peacefully. This is so beautiful about the mind. And we all have this free will. How do we want to use it? We want to use it as our friend or our enemy? Because if we remember the soul's true nature, it's pure and connected to divinity. And this mind is simply a bridge, right? It's a tool. And it's up to us to decide how to use it. So by developing this skepticism towards the mind's misleading promises, in the same way we have skepticism over that next Instagram ad, right? We can restrain these impulsive habits. And we can consistently redirect our attention towards spiritual practice and Krishna. And in this way, we can gradually reclaim our freedom. So this is good for us as we go through our days and our week. We can continue. We need to continuously ask ourselves, am I letting my mind lead me towards unnecessary wars, illusions, or self-sabotage? Right? Or am I choosing to listen to Krishna's voice within? Trusting that it's what's guiding me home to my true self. And so this path to mastery of the mind is a lifelong journey. But every small step taken with awareness brings us closer to this peace, this clarity, this joy. So remember that you're not the mind, you're not the body, you're something divine. This is just so important. Right? We can start to see the mind objectively, like a child that needs its YouTube filters turned on, because left to its own devices, it's just going to click on, the most exciting things that it sees, which we all know is probably not good on YouTube. So learn to see our minds like this, and we can train it to be our friends. Does anybody want to share anything? Okay, please share.
The one example that you gave about how we see the advertisements and how people are calling and then we hang up. So we understand that part, that, okay, they're trying to sell something and it's waste of time, it's useless and all that. We know that we understand that with our intelligence. But so true about the mind, that is also creating all these unnecessary desires. And then again, even the intelligence starts helping. Okay, yeah, we should get this, or oh, yeah, we should do this. And then, of course, the mind is going to scold us that, look, what a waste of time you did by going there or doing this. So this mind is always talking to us, and so many unnecessary things, so many unnecessary desires, we fall for it. And then I wonder, without this Bhagavad Gita knowledge, we would have been so lost, right? I mean, we wouldn't even realize that the mind is playing all these games. And I mean, totally lost. And then we would get anger at every little thing, we would react at every little thing. And now it's like, no, we don't need to react. I mean, all these lust and anger, and it just drives away the focus, and we are somebody else when all these feelings come. So the advertisement part was a great example. I liked it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
the difference is that we're not identified at all with those advertisements, but we're
Yeah,
so overly identified with the mind that we just can't, we lose the ability to properly discern. No, and it's so interesting how that happens. But yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing.
thank you. Thank you for sharing that example. I like the last one, the two dogs one. Which one do you feed?
Yeah, right. Yeah, because they're both going to be there. Which one are we
Yeah,
feeding? Yeah, thank you.
thank
Narayani, please share with us.
Hey, Haribo.
Very
Thank you for your class. I'm doing a new course in the Zurich Temple, and last week we just had the first session, and our homework was to write a letter to the mind, and that made me think of, when you were talking about the mind, made me think of my homework, and I started doing it, and I recognized that I almost wrote the letter to my mind, almost like writing it to a person, because you mentioned it, that it can be a friend or our enemy, and the people we in our life we consider friends or enemies, those are usually persons. And so I was trying to just right from the start to talk to my mind as like, okay, let's just assume you're my friend. And because when you have to sort of like apply constructive criticism, to, let's say, a coworker or even to a friend or some person, then you're supposed to start with something positive, and then pack it in a sandwich, maybe appreciate it in the end, or that person.
Narayani,
And that's,
do you have this letter? Would you want to read the letter, any of it to us?
I'm trying to start my computer new at work. No, hold on, I have it actually on my phone. Let me just switch. It should be saved on my phone. I can read it.
Do you want to read some of it? You can read some of it.
Okay.
If it's long, you can just read some of it. But I'd love to hear what you have to say to your mind.
Okay, I'm not done yet, but okay, I'll wrote. Dear mind, thank you for being with me all this time, this life, and if this is all true, then we've been together for a really, really long time already. You have given me a lot of good thoughts over the years from what I can remember, but now it's time to adjust our relationship. I have let you go on your own way too often, and you're trying again and again. You know as well as me that mostly your wants are not good for me. I want us to be friends, to be on the same side, because when this happens, we both will be more calm and content. Like when you tell me what to eat, that has to change. Very, very urgently, this needs to be changed. And you know what? I appreciate all your suggestions. You know what's good for me, but then also often you don't. You think you know, but you don't. I don't want to overrule you just like that, but you need to listen to me, please, and learn what's better for me and act accordingly. I know we can make this work, and just thinking of this better future for the both of us, I can already feel gratitude that's coming our way. We will be great doing that together. I have a next paragraph, but I haven't finished
So
that. But
good. I love the tone. You're so nice to your mind.
yeah, I
So
thought,
loving.
I want to be friends with it, and so I have to treat it like a friend.
Yeah.
And the next course is on Friday, and if I get a chance, maybe next Monday or Thursday, I can share what actually the facilitator said about just the homework itself, and maybe others read their letters. So
Yeah. Thank you
yeah,
so much. That was so inspiring. Really
thank
nice
you.
letter.
Very welcome.
Okay, my friends. Well, I will see you. Mariah says, pray to Krishna. My mind is full of desires and unnecessary thoughts. Please help me to engage it on your lotus feet. Ah, so nice. Thank you, Mariah. We miss you. You're at work. We miss you. Mariah says, I love that. I want to write one too. Yeah, we should all write letters to the mind. That's so empowering. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear too how empowering that is for you, Narayani. Just writing that, really helps. Oh, Katie G, you have something to say?
Thanks. Yeah, just quickly, we were discussing kind of similarly in the Sage group a few weeks back, and I'm blessed to be in the Sage group with Narayani. And someone shared there's a bhajan, like a prayer by Govinda Dasa Kaviraja that is like to the mind. I can share it in the chat.
Yeah,
But anyway,
that'd be great.
the first line is, "O mind, just worship the lotus feet of the son of Nanda, which makes one fearless. Having obtained this rare human birth, cross over this ocean of worldly existence through the association of saintly persons." And it goes on for 3 more stanzas.
Yeah.
There's tools for us to help pray to our mind, and that's really nice.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, and also it's like people that have been practicing spiritual life forever, and are very evolved, still struggle with the mind. So it's like if you're hard on yourself, like understand this is a difficult thing, and some of the most evolved people still struggle with it. So know that. Yeah,
Cool.
thank
I
you.
just put it in the chat.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Thanks,
Thanks.
Katie. Well, thank you all for coming and sharing and doing the work. And I look forward to seeing you all on Monday. We'll continue our journey through chapter 6. So much nectar for us. Thank you all.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Have a good weekend.